Welcome to this episode of The People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am absolutely thrilled, both thrilled and delighted to have as our guest in the virtual studio today, Dr. Stein. Dr. Stein is a world-renowned clinical psychologist, international best-selling author, and sought-after speaker and founder and executive chair of Multi Health Systems, MHS, a publisher of scientifically validated assessments for over 40 years, which has been named a 3-time winner of Profit 100. That's the fastest growing companies in Canada, one of Canada's best managed companies since 2013, and Canada's 10 most admired corporate cultures, 2016 Waterstone. All of you who are in HR in our audience know that these awards aren't easily earned. And as a veteran of several great place to work campaigns, it really humbles me to have Stein as our guest today. Just a little more about Dr. Stein. He's a leading expert on psychological assessment and emotional intelligence. He's consulted with military and government agencies, including the Canadian Forces, U.S. Air Force, Army, Navy, special units of the Pentagon, FBI Academy, as well as corporate organizations, including American Express, Air Canada, Canyon Ranch, Coca-Cola Mexico, and professional sports teams. And I think this is one of the things that's most interesting about Dr. Stein's bio. He's consulted with numerous reality TV shows, including Big Brother Canada, The Amazing Race Canada, Master Chef Canada, Bachelor Canada, Real Housewives of Toronto, Bachelor in Paradise, Blown Away, and many others, providing psychological expertise in candidate selection assessments. He's a teacher. He's a past chairperson of the Psychology Foundation of Canada, a former assistant professor in the psychiatry department at University of Toronto, and a former adjunct professor of psychology at York University in Toronto. And I'll just say finally about Dr. Stein that he is past president of the Ontario Psychological Association and a fellow of the Canadian Psychological Association. Welcome, Dr. Stein.
Well, thank you, Mike. Wow. That's a lot.
It is a lot, and you're quite an accomplished individual. But why don't you tell our audience about yourself as you'd like to be described?
Well, basically, I'm a clinical psychologist and organizational psychologist. I work in both sides of psychology. And by accident, I got into the business world and set up a company. And not knowing a lot about business, I guess my model was psychology. So using psychological principles, we built this organization. It started, it was an overnight success, by the sounds of it. We started 40 years ago. So overnight takes a long time. It was my wife and I working out of our basement at the beginning. And I think now we have over 200 employees, probably 210 or something like that.
Well, that's quite an accomplishment. And then I assume you have a wide variety of personality types in your business, of different levels of EQ and EI in your business. Is that right?
Well, we do have different types. We're really big on diversity before it was even popular, and inclusion. But in terms of EQ, no, we try not to have different levels. We have different profiles of EQ, but we've been screening people for many, many years on their emotional intelligence. And we try and get, the upper level, either whether you're on customer service, you're a programmer, you're in marketing. We like people with relatively high emotional intelligence throughout our organization. And I think that's one of the things that's helped make us so successful.
That's so great. And just before we dig into your career inspiration, your career journey, your story reminds me a little bit. It's probably about 40 years ago for me when I took my first MBTI class, and I studied with a guy named Otto Kroger. It was Otto and I think his wife Janet at the time.
Yes.
And one of the things that Otto talked about was that in his business that he was building and growing, offering MBTI training, was that he once made the mistake of trying to hire one of every different MBTI types in his office. And he described it as a disaster.
Right.
So he stopped using it, I guess, at some level as a screening instrument. But your story reminded me of Otto.
Well, I knew Otto, and Otto was a great guy. I really loved Otto. And, his company's still there, OKA. And in fact,
Yeah.
they saw the light and they switched from MBTI to our EQI, emotional intelligence tool. And they're one of our biggest trainers right now in the US.
Oh, how wonderful. I certainly recall a very fond experience with Otto and the whole team at OKA. So it's really great to hear that they're doing and how they've improved their offerings by using the tools that you make available through MHS. But Dr. Stein, could you share the story of your career path and what inspired you to focus on psychological assessments and emotional intelligence?
Sure. I started out like, I guess, an ordinary psychologist. I graduated. My first job was in a large mental health treatment center for kids and adolescents. And what happened was, and we're going back about 45 years or so, I got a research grant for a large project looking at different treatments for different difficult adolescents. And the problem I was having was these kids didn't want to take my pre-tests, before we put them into treatment so we could measure the change. In fact, they used to tell me where I could shove those tests. They didn't like them very much. So around that same time, there was these two guys in California. You might have heard of them, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And they invented something called the Apple computer, right? So I saw the kids were sort of taking to this thing, and I thought maybe if we can get one of these and program some of our diagnostic tests on there, maybe the kids would be more willing to do it. So we did that. I brought in a programmer. We typed it up, and the kids started coming into my office, and they loved it. I had actually ended up having a lineup of kids who wanted to take my tests, which was amazing. But even more amazing was the fact that the information we collected was better than all the psychiatrists and psychologists that had seen them had collected. They told the computer stuff about sexual abuse, about drug use, which drugs they were using, previous suicide attempts. So I actually published an article in a scientific journal back then showing how the computers could pick up more sensitive information. So I went to the hospital administration and said, I'd like to change the direction of my research from the treatment side to the assessment side. I'm really fascinated by this. And they said, no, we don't think so. We want to stay with the treatment. So I went home and told my wife, and we decided to set up our own little company that I do at night. And she was on maternity leave. She worked in an addiction treatment center. And while she was watching our daughter at the time, we set up this little company called it MHS, and we started programming, and we started with the clinical side, which is what I knew best. So we're actually still the number one test in the world for ADHD, attention deficit. But we also have widely used tools for autism, for children's anxiety and depression, and so on. And then I expanded. One of my colleagues was very famous for his work with psychopaths in the world and working in prisons and jails. And we got into the area of risk assessment. So now we're one of the world's leading organizations for looking at dangerous offenders and the level of risk they present. And then from there, I met another colleague who at the time developed the first test of emotional intelligence, and nobody wanted to publish it. So he brought it to me, and we had a look at it and said, well, this looks promising, but no one ever heard of this thing. So we decided to publish it, and shortly after that, Dan Goleman's book came out, which you probably know about. Probably one of the biggest selling books in the history of psychology.
Dan Goleman, right?
Yeah. Sold 5 million copies like in no time. And suddenly emotional intelligence became a thing, and we were already there with the world's first measure of it. So that took me into the corporate world and, development and leadership. And we've been doing research in that area now for over 25 years. EQI is kind of the standard in emotional intelligence. And the most recent area that we've moved into is identifying gifted kids. We've developed a new technology for picking up kids from whatever cultural background they come from, whatever social economic status they come from. And we've done a series of research studies in that area and found that we're doing much better than the traditional ways of picking up these kids. We're discovering kids, African-American kids, and other kids that were not being picked up by the usual methods. So basically, my career has been about taking psychology, the science of psychology, and applying it to the world. And our mission really is to see how much influence we can have. And in 40 years, I can say that we've influenced the lives of millions and millions of people around the world.
Well, that's so amazing. It's a real testament to the type of work that you do. I want to talk a little bit about you as a business person, though. And you founded Multi Health Systems (MHS) over 40 years ago now, and just based on what you've described, I mean that's a pretty significant chunk of recognition that's occurred under your leadership. I mean, your ability to impact and influence so many people, their careers, their lives. What do you think has been the key to that business success, to MHS's success and its impact on the field of psychology and beyond?
Well, there's a number of things. One is that, we really do have a purpose that we believe in, a mission. And I think that's important for any organization. And people who work for us believe in that mission, whether you're on our clinical side and you really believe in helping kids and families, in our public safety side, where you believe in making the streets safer for people by, locking up the people who should be locked up and not locking up the people who shouldn't be. And emotional intelligence, we've changed the lives of millions of people in the workplace. So I think number one has been, sticking with our purpose. As a psychologist, I always say I never took a business course. I give lectures in business schools, but I've never taken a business course. And I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's worked for me. So, basically using psychology even in business, I mean, one is being good to people and having respect, and respect is a thing that's really big in our organization, whether you agree with someone or not agree with someone. We respect their opinion and we listen to everyone. We don't do what everybody wants, but we're very, I guess we call it empathic in terms of that way. We practice what we preach as much as we can. I mean, people who work with us love to work with us. And if they don't, we help them go somewhere else. So we really, really try and put the right people in the right seats, as Collins would say.
Right.
We do all that kind of stuff.
Really sounds like, in many ways, the essence of humanistic values in the workplace, treating people with respect, with dignity, a recognition that people are in progress, which is all the topic of my next book, hopefully out in October, on the people-centered workplace and people-centered performance. But, you've given all of your extensive work, your publications in emotional intelligence, including the EQ Edge, EI for Dummies. How do you see the concept of emotional intelligence evolving today? I mean, it's a long time since Dick Boyatzis and Richard and Dan Goleman. You've been at the forefront of this. I assume there have been modifications and upgrades to the kind of assessment methodologies that you use. But what innovations are on the horizon in the area of EQ?
Well, we're doing a lot of research in applying it to specific occupational types and specific careers. What aspects of emotional intelligence are important in sales versus what's important for someone who is a computer programmer or works in technology. So we've worked in the healthcare field. So we've been diversifying many different areas and trying to pinpoint specifically which areas are to focus. Why train to learn something that's not going to work or isn't important for you, right? And the other thing we've been involved in since the beginning is the ability side of emotional intelligence, which is a little different. So the people who actually coined the term, it wasn't Dan Goleman, by the way. It was Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. They're the originators. They published the first paper. Yeah, in 1989 was the first paper they published on it. And we work with them, and we've developed what we call a performance test of emotional intelligence, which actually looks at your ability to recognize emotions, your ability to understand what emotions are about. We've had that test out for a number of years, but we have a major new revision coming in the next couple of months. Again, where we've collected data on thousands of people and looking at how that affects performance. So that's kind of the pioneering edge of emotional intelligence, where we're using all kinds of neat new technology that you can put in your computer and get a good measure of your abilities in this area.
And Steve, if people in our audience want to learn more about the products and services that MHS offers, how do they find that on the web? Where do they go?
Well, they go to mhs.com for the company, or for my own personal website is stevenstein.com.
That's great. As I mentioned in the introduction, you've been a consultant to a number of reality TV shows, and I can't imagine that there aren't any people in our listening audience who haven't touched reality TV in some way, even if they're deniers that they've ever have seen a show. But certainly, I mean, it's expansive. Big Brother Canada, Amazing Race Canada, Master Chef Canada, Bachelor Canada, Real Housewives of Toronto, Bachelor in Paradise, Blown Away, many others. So, thinking about your consultancy work in reality TV, how do you apply these psychological principles to candidate selection? And what do you think is the psychological allure of reality TV for audiences?
Okay, those are two big questions. And if I seem a bit groggy to you, last night was our big finale for Big Brother Canada. So I'm still a little bit out of it. Yeah, we had an amazing season this year. And it was a lot of work. But okay, you had a couple of questions.
Does everyone escape the house? Is that's Big Brother, right?
Yes, we let them out.
Okay.
The finalists won the prize, whatever it was, a couple of $100,000. And I meet with all of them, and I'm involved with all of them. So in terms of my role as a psychologist on all these different shows, basically a lot of it's in casting and screening. We want it to be safe. So for insurance purposes, the right kind of people that do these things get involved in them, and also to get a sense of their personalities. What sort of when you put together a cast, it's like a Broadway show. You want somebody who's manipulative. You want somebody who's happy-go-lucky. So you try and get all these different roles and assess people to see where they fit. In terms of the bigger picture for me personally, I see this as kind of a microcosm of some of what we do in the workplace. We test somebody or a whole bunch of people, 60 people, 20 people, and then we put them in a situation for like 10 weeks or whatever, a real pressure cooker. And we see who survives, who wins, who gets through this. To me, it's a psychological experiment. It's really a social experiment. And it's a way to really test the tools that we develop. We test them with our tools and we see if we can predict, and we take that to the real world down the road. In fact, I met with a psychologist who's doing some of the selection for NASA for the Mars expedition. And we were exchanging notes about how we assess people for those kinds of things. And she uses a lot of the same factors that we use in terms of looking at who can survive in an enclosed place for a long period of time without a lot of social interaction. It was funny because she said afterwards, I love Big Brother. Can I come and visit your set? And I said, well, I love Mars. Can I come and visit you?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, please go ahead. Continue.
No, it's really a social experiment as I see it. And I have a research mind, so we actually evaluate it. But it's fun. I love entertainment. I work with musicians. I work in TV. And I just love the people and I love the work. And, I did my time working with people in psychiatric facilities and challenges and difficulties. So I think at this part of my life, I want to work with happy people who want to do better.
It's interesting. One of the most interesting assessment centers that I ever participated in was back in the early 80s in preparation to becoming a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they were running some sort of experiment for people who were going to very remote parts of the world, what some described as the fourth world, these tiny specks of dirt out in the middle of the Pacific. And so 20 of us or so were sent to this antebellum mansion in the deep south in the U.S., and they closed all the windows and turned up the heat and gave us rice for 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. Well, clearly you survived. I can tell you wrong.
Clearly I survived. It did okay as a volunteer for 3 years.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, it's, assessment is so fascinating and so interesting, the different angles in which we take. And I appreciate your perspective, Steve, about working with clinical populations versus working with those in the arts and entertainment. Certainly a different world. And thinking about that for whom I guess are many of the clients of MHS are, what I call everyday business people in organizations, trying to bring their best to what they do, trying to get along with other people in the workplace. And, it makes me, I think you're the co-author of a book called Hardiness, Making Stress Work for You. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's my one of my more recent books. Yeah, and I did that with my co-author Paul Bartone, who was an Army psychologist, a retired colonel from the U.S. Army, and taught at West Point.
So, what is this concept of hardiness? And Can you offer some practical advice in terms of managing stress? But what's hardiness first?
Okay, I'll break down what it is. I mean, the interesting thing is it has about 20 to 25 years of research behind it. And one of the reasons Paul and I got together, because he's been doing much of this research, and he's been doing it as through the U.S. military. So a lot of his research is published in military journals, scientific journals, and the public doesn't really know about this, and it's widely used in those circles. So Paul and I are good friends, and I kept convincing him, Paul, we gotta tell the world about your work. I mean, this is amazing stuff and really practical. So what it is, in very simply, we talk about the 3 C's of hardiness. And these are the things that help you navigate stress and become even stronger as a result of difficult situations. The first one we call commitment. And that's all about having a purpose, having a goal, having goals, things you want to achieve, having a sort of a bigger picture that keeps you focused so the little things don't pull you down. The second area we talk about is called challenge. And that's about looking at problems as more of a puzzle, kind of stepping back, looking at it from a different perspective. And people who are high in challenge like to grow. They like to learn. They like to try new things. So challenge has been found to be really significant. And the third area that we focus on is called control. And what that has to do with is knowing what you can control versus what you can't. So if it's raining out there, I can't spend all my time worrying about and fighting the weather, but I can put on a raincoat. I can take an umbrella. So there are things that I can do or control within my world. So those are basically the 3 C's. And as I mentioned, 20 years of research in all kinds of different populations. And in our book, we give you a lot of practical examples on how to build in each of these levels of hardiness.
It's interesting that you describe in the title of the book, Hardiness, making stress work for you. I think a lot of people think about how can I get rid of my stress as opposed to making it work.
Right. And that doesn't always work out very well if you try and suppress what's going on. So, and that's how we differ from resilience. Like resilience is going through stress and then just coming back to where you were before you started. Hardiness involves actually learning from the stress and coming out even better than you were when you started.
Yeah, such an interesting concept because I do think about resilience perhaps as a cousin, but hardiness is a different quality. It's a different attribute. It's a different part of how we operate, how we function.
Especially if we're functioning, at our best, if we're optimal. Some of the examples we give in the book are professional athletes, entertainers who've gone through difficult challenges and overcame them. We have a story about Lady Gaga, another one about Madonna in the entertainment world. I work with the coach of a U.S. Open tennis champion and how she was able to go from nowhere to beating Serena Williams for the final championship. How these concepts of hardiness fit into their training and made them achieve. And we take that and translate it to the average person in their workplace who has to do a project, has to do a presentation. How do you use these factors to get through those difficult times?
Well, the tennis champ did that all and didn't have to survive bees. I live in Southern California, and at our big tennis tournament, BNP Paribas, at Indian Wells this summer, part of the match was stopped because of an invasion of bees on the court.
Oh, no.
Quite fascinating to
watch. That's an important match, too. So
yeah. It's the 5th largest tournament now. Mm-hmm. But I love how you break this down in hardiness, making stress work for you. Commitment, challenge, control. It provides an accessible framework for people to begin, I think, to understand that concept, and for organizational leaders, particularly for those in HR, to talk about this topic of hardiness and to talk and think about it. Mm-hmm. I just want to move a little bit to the world of leadership, though, and emotional intelligence. And what's the role of emotional intelligence in effective leadership? A lot of my clients, they're all very smart people. They're successful people. They're well-degreed, well-awarded. I work with many scientists, founders, entrepreneurs, and they are often the smartest people at the table. And many of them have rough edges about calling people morons or stupid, and some because these are folks who have generally advanced, they've risen to the top of their organizational ladder, or they founded their organization. These attributes don't often help them succeed. And yet, I think many of them, in my coaching with them, they still bring this to bear about how they think about other people and about their ideas. So, what is the lowdown on leadership and emotional intelligence?
Well, we believe that emotional intelligence is a critical aspect of leadership. And yeah, we've seen a lot of these brilliant scientists, brilliant professors, and, it's hard for them to understand this, but you gotta, you point out to them that, do you ever notice that it's hard for you to sell your concept, or the people aren't always buying into what you want? You think that there may be something happening there that's preventing that? Do you think there's something that you could do to change that? And start sort of questioning through how to get through that, because we see that a lot. And those people have to, people come and go. They can't keep staff. They can't really get projects completed. People drop out. And it's usually because of those behavioral things that are the impediments. It's great to be brilliant and to come up with new ideas and to invent things. But if you can't sell them, you can't get people on board, you're not going to be a great leader.
Yeah, and where I really notice it, it's not so much with their own teams. They've hired these people, they've worked with them over a period of years. And, most science and technology requires high degrees of collegiality. One person doesn't solve these big problems, but it often affects the developing people in the organization. Maybe somebody who's finally come into the world of work at 35 after their postdoc.
Right.
And, how do you get and they get offended by this, sort of stuff. And I think that's where you really lose. And those are the people you need the most because they're closest to the technology, Once you're out of school or out of the postdoc environment for a few years, you're woefully behind.
Yeah, it's changed the environment, even younger than the 35, the Gen Zs that we're seeing coming in. They have a whole different perspective on work. I mean, they want to learn. They want to know what you can do for them, not just what they can do for you. And we have lots of them in our organization. And I love these kids. They're teaching me stuff all the time. And that's it. I like to learn from them. It's not, we don't just tell them what to do. We do offer training and development, but there's so much that they bring to the table. And unless you recognize that and appreciate that, you're not going to get the cooperation and the great creativity and work that they can give you.
Oh, that's great. Just a few more questions, Dr. Steven Stein, who you can reach at mhs.com or stevenstein.com. One is, we've talked a little bit about this, but looking forward, how do you anticipate the field of psychological assessments will change with advancements in technology? Clearly, you were a pioneer in that. I mean, given the story that you described at the beginning of today's episode about working with children, these adolescents who were in crisis. What do you think is going to change with advancements in technology and human psychology?
Well, I like to call psychology assessment, we're sort of the laggards in the technology business. Psychologists were the last ones to automate. And we've been fighting that battle literally for 40 years. We still have psychologists who want to use paper. So it's been a struggle for us, and we're doing this every day. But there's great stuff happening in terms of technology in the future. We're doing a lot of stuff that incorporates a little bit of the AI concept into it. We do a lot of stuff looking at, the importance of reaction time in a lot of aspects of assessment. There's a lot of new areas, developing areas that we're trying to explore and seeing how the technology can help us in our assessment. There's some new innovations in things like ADHD and other areas where technology not only assesses, but takes part of the treatment into account.
Oh, so wonderful. And, throughout your distinguished career as a psychologist, as an influencer, as a person who has helped shape the careers and behaviors of many in the workplace, what's been one of the most surprising things that you've learned about human behavior or emotional intelligence?
Well, one thing is that there's behavior that's unexpected. You can't predict everything. People will sometimes surprise you, and that could be for the better or it could be for the worse. Sometimes you have people who you think are really have everyone's best interest at heart, and it turns out that that may not be the case. Or vice versa, people who others have written off and find hopeless and no hope and will surprise you in a certain circumstance and do amazing things. So I find that humans are interesting in terms of their surprises, the unexpected behaviors that we see, and that never ceases to amaze me.
I'm watching the runaway new Korean drama, Queen of Tears. And one of the matriarchal figures in the drama series says that to expect the unexpected, to be surprised by it.
Yeah.
And it certainly underscores what you've said. And I have one final line of inquiry before we really begin to wrap up, Dr. Stein. And for those who are aspiring, I think about all the folks in our audience, many of who have undergraduate degrees or came to human resources or organizational consulting or coaching through psychology but for those who are really aspiring to make their mark in the field of psychology, emotional intelligence or leadership, what advice would you offer based on your experiences and success?
I think the main thing would be to find something unique, something that hasn't been done before in that area. So if it is emotional intelligence, for example, review what's happened there, read all the stuff you can, and then say, gee, I wonder how it would apply in a particular area that no one's thought of before. I think that's one way. We had someone come to us. He was an undergraduate student, and he did a little research project as an undergraduate on emotional intelligence and humor. And he sent it to me. And I thought it was really cool. It was really creative. He had some great data. And he kept in touch with me, and we eventually ended up hiring him. And while he was here, he worked on our emotional intelligence team, and he got to know some of the professionals, including Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. Ended up going to graduate school, went to Yale, gets his PhD in psychology in Yale, and he's teaching it at like Wharton Business School. Like, he's become a great success with his career. And it was all started with us because he wrote this really interesting article on emotional intelligence and humor, something no one had really thought about at that time. And now his whole career is within that field.
Well, it's so great. And it's been such a delight again for me, and I'm sure for everyone in our audience, to be in conversation with you this morning. People can find your work. It's available on Amazon, wherever people purchase their books, I'm sure. But Hardiness, Making Stress Work for You to Achieve Your Life Goals. The author of The EQ Leader, Emotional Intelligence for Dummies. Also, your co-authorship of The EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence and Your Success. And about making your workplace great, 7 keys to an emotionally intelligent organization. Such a great body of work, such tremendous resources that are available to folks. Be able to find out more at stevenstein.com, more at mhs.com. And I really thank you for answering all of these questions today, for being so engaging about your insights, your experiences, your professional achievements, and your perspectives on the fields of psychology and emotional intelligence. And you really have, in this very brief time that we've spent together, provided, I think, some comprehensive insight into all the fields of interest to you. And I want to thank you for being a guest on The People Dividend.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to meet with you, Mike. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah. And until the next episode of The People Dividend, stay well.